Welcome to another episode of Beyond Explanation. My name is Brandon, and today I am joined by Solus, and we are back for part 2 of Dyatlov Pass. It's been a long time. I believe it's been about 9 months since our first part 1 of Dyatlov Pass. I do apologize for the long amount of time that it's taken us to get around to part 2, but to say that we didn't see the circumstances that were going to happen in the world coming would be an interesting turn of phrase for sure. I think that for us, it gave us a lot of time to kind of delve back into the subject of Dyatlov Pass quite a bit, but it also, I know we're very grateful to be back and starting to get back into the swing of things again. What's up, Solus? How you doing? Long time, no talk.
Doing well, B. Yeah, man, I'm healthy and thankful for that. And excited to get back into this, man. It has been a while. Wanted to make a joke at some point there, but I don't think we can really joke about it, so let's just move past it.
Well, we had to wait till it's over, right? It's X amount of months. Once it's done, then it's funny. So we gotta wait till it's done a little bit longer, and then we can actually, done, period, then wait a couple months, and then it can be funny.
Yes, it's 22.3 years.
Thank you. Yes. So in 22.3 years-ish, this is going to be great. Anyway, so what I wanted to do to kind of go through and update everybody about Dyatlov Pass Part 2 is, if you haven't listened to Part 1 of the series, definitely go back and make sure you check that out. It's been a long time since we've talked about it. We basically recapped everything in chronological order from the beginning of who the hikers were, why they were going on this trip, and what they were ultimately looking to accomplish, all the way up through the actual trip itself, what we knew about the trip from beginning to end. And in this episode, what we're going to be getting into more is about the investigation. And I thought it was important to recap a lot about the investigation because just all the events that surround the hikers, I feel like is super important. But the investigation in and of itself was like its own thing. Like there was so many things that happened during the investigation that I think lead to this being such a mystery. And that was one of the reasons why it took me some time to really go back and recap a lot of this and decide what points of this are important or not important or what have you. I mean, we've been kind of struggling about that from the beginning. So it's tough when you try to go to tell a story. You want to make sure you hit all the most important points. But with this one, I mean, there's just so much information. It's crazy.
Yes, we have all the details of the hikers' diaries and such, but at the same time, there's so much secrecy in that Soviet era and secret nuclear facilities in the area, possible KGB influences, all kinds of variables to sort through.
Yes, definitely. So I'm very excited to get started tonight and go through everything. Just I want to say up front, please do bear with us because I'm basically going to be recapping for you guys 2 different books. One of the books is Dead Mountain by Donnie Eichar. And the other book that I've been getting into that was suggested to me by one of our YouTube commenters was Don't Go There by Svetlana. So we've kind of gone through both of those books. I want to make sure that we kind of give them each of them their own due. So I haven't gone through these verbatim. So if you really want to go and find out each and all the facts, buy them for yourself. I mean, I think you can get both books for under $20. They're definitely worth it if you want to go and check out, know more about this. If this situation is something that interests you, I would highly suggest it. I do want to preface that the Svetlana book, Don't Go There, is a lot different than a lot of the previous material that I've ever found on this case. She says...
Makes you a little skeptical, right?
It does. It kind of makes me wonder because I don't know why it's so different than a lot of the other things that have been out there. And we're going to kind of go through that as we talk about the different things here. So just keep
When was that book written?
Let's find out.
Because this it was a cold case that recently reopened in 2019, right? And this is written by a Russian citizen, so there's a possibility there's new information available.
The publication date was March 23rd of 2015 for the Don't Go There book.
Okay. So maybe not too much new information, but definitely a new perspective.
Definitely. So Again, just bear with us. It's going to be a lot of recapping information that was read in the books. So just as we go through everything, it's going to be pretty heavy on information. So if you are into that sort of thing, this is going to be the podcast for you. Lastly, before we jump in, just a quick shout out to Astonishing Legends, because if it wasn't for that podcast, we wouldn't be here. And they're kind of the ones that, for me anyway, kind of first told me this story. So I just wanted to give a quick little shout out to them. If you're into podcasts and you love this subject, I would definitely suggest checking out their podcast of their coverage of Dyatlov Pass. I did think it was really good as well. They cover it from just the Dead Mountain Donnie Eichar perspective. So yeah, hopefully this will be a little different if you've heard that.
Yeah, they are also the best in this field. There's a couple other good podcasts. I can't name them off the top of my head that deal with some of these subjects, but Astonishing Legends really dives in deep. Always worth a listen.
And if you like really quick hitters and you're on YouTube, I would suggest Bedtime Stories. That's another really good one. Yeah,
they do, at the very least, a great introduction to a lot of these topics.
All right, so here we go, folks. Dyatlov Pass Part 2. The following is based on the extensive records of those involved, and is a timeline of the events immediately after the alarm was raised. The group failed to arrive in Vichy on February 12th, but as noted by Yuri Yudin at the time, they'd most likely lost a day due to carrying the extra load he left with them upon turning back. Yet by February 17th, there was still no trace of the group. Soon, worried parents started to call the university sports club asking for news. Some even queried the Communist Party's local office. Later, trying to comprehend the tragedy, Rima asked many questions no one wanted to answer. On February 20th, the Explorers Club of the university called a meeting, and the other expedition groups were informed that there might be a problem. The participants were swiftly organized into search parties. By February 21st, 4 groups were dispatched to find the hikers. 2 of them were led by students, 1 by an experienced climber, 1 by a colonel. Some Mansi people were also dispatched to help. Moscow was also made aware and sent a few experienced hikers and helicopter support. Within hours, the groups were dropped via helicopter at strategic points to begin the search for the hikers.
So a significant amount of time and maybe snowfall had accumulated between the time the hikers went missing and the searchers landed on the ground.
And not to mention several days. I mean, that's the main thing, is that since they had a reason to be late, it was almost destined for them to just not be found in any expedient amount of time.
Yeah, it's the first of the perfect storm details.
So after February 21st, there's really not many updates until February 24th. On February 24th, a ski trail was discovered along the banks of the Aspira River. One of the searchers wrote, "On the top, where we were brought in by helicopter, we saw no tracks. The next day was dedicated to some useless searches along the river. That very day, we came to the banks of the river, where we knew that Dyatlov was intending to create his storage depot. Sure enough, on the left of the bank of this river, we found some old ski tracks. A radio message was sent by our search team operator, and we received the following message from our fellow rescue group. We're 6 or 10 kilometers from the river, and we found narrow sport ski tracks, different to the wide tracks of the Mansi skis. It's a good trail made by a number of people, and it's probably 10 to 15 days old. Very easy to follow in the forest, but almost invisible to open places. The track goes to the ridge, where of course it disappears due to the wind and the snowdrifts." So it took them 3 days after they were dropped off via helicopter to even kind of get an idea as to where they had went. Like, okay, now we know, and we have an idea as to the direction they went, but we haven't actually seen tracks or anything to indicate that they'd gone that way. And now 3 days later, they finally found something to show that, okay, we're on the right track.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but a very large haystack that keeps getting disturbed and blown around.
Yeah, a haystack that's covered in about 18 feet of snow.
Shoo.
On February 26th, the tent was discovered. As we approached the tent, we discovered the entrance was out of the snow, but the rest of it was buried. In the snow around the tent, there were ski poles and 1 pair of skis. The snow on the tent was 15 to 20 centimeters deep. The snow had obviously drifted there and was very firm. At the side of the tent, there was a Chinese flashlight, which was later found to belong to Dyatlov. But we couldn't understand why the snow under the flashlight was 10 centimeters thick, yet there wasn't any on the flashlight itself. I put the flashlight down and saw it was switched off. I switched it on, and there was light. I didn't notice it at the time, but I was later told that close to the side of the tent was a mark where someone had relieved themselves.
So 10 centimeters for us other Americans is about 3 inches.
There you go.
3.9.
And next to the entrance of the tent was an ice pick. There were no bodies near the tent or inside of it. The students took the diaries and a flask of alcohol from the tent before returning to join the rest of the group. Around 4 p.m. that day, they met another group with a radio set and sent a message with the coordinates of the tent.
So that flask of alcohol kind of stands out to me. I feel like in the Astonishing Legends description of the events, they were very specific that there wasn't alcohol, I guess for medical purposes, but a flask of alcohol. So is this a differing detail, or is that the medicinal alcohol?
I would assume that's the medicinal alcohol. I'm fairly positive that's just a change of description a little, but they're still referencing the same like single flask of alcohol that they brought for that one purpose.
Gotcha. Could even be a translation, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. So on February 27th, an inspector arrived to see the tent. At first sight, the tent appeared to be covered with snow, but when we looked closer, we saw it was still pitched on its pole at the entrance and was held firmly by the guy's ropes. A stick held the other end, but the middle sagged from the weight of the snow, and the windward side was shredded and torn apart, so the other end was low and buried in the snow. It wasn't possible to observe in the interior until we dug it out, but the tent was well placed, and they'd used their upturned skis as a flat floor below the ground sheet.
That's a very important detail, and probably in the our theories portion of the podcast, I'll mention why that's such a important detail.
Okay, awesome. A stove lay next to the entrance of the tent, but it was disassembled, and it's in its cover. There was a single log outside of the tent. We also noticed almost all of their things were in place: a bucket, axes, and cups. In his later testimony, they added that the stove was full of unburnt wood. So one of the searchers, when they found the tent, had basically talked about when he got there, they were so overtaken by like fervor for trying to find the other students, and like they didn't even think about treating it as a crime scene. And they had taken the ice pick and kind of like torn part of the tent to try to get into it to see if their fellow students were inside. So they didn't really think to treat it like a crime scene when they first got there, because they were just trying to figure out if their friends were still alive.
I gotcha. That's always a big mistake, though.
Yeah, so they didn't really treat the crime scene with the proper care, nor did they preserve all the evidence for the investigation. So it definitely created a problem in the end, but you could understand why, if you were looking for your friends, you might be a little overzealous in what you're doing.
Oh, definitely.
So there was a roll of film 15 meters below the tent. It probably came from inside the tent. When they spread out the things that were found inside to study them, they found that inside.
Wow, 15 meters?
15, yeah. There was a roll of film 15 meters below the tent.
That's about 45 to 50 feet. It's pretty deep.
Wow, okay. See, I'm glad you're here, bud. You're helping me out. I can visualize things even better now.
You got it. All those tape measure reading skills are coming in handy.
There you go. Love it, love it, love it. It was stated that while they worked there, they tried to remove the snow using other skis and ski poles. There were 10 of them working without any real system. Often they just took stuff out of the snow, and it was hard to say where it really actually came from. They weren't even like processing the stuff to like know like, okay, this came from here, this was found over here, this was inside the tent, this was outside the tent. Like no real system to have any kind of remembrance of where things were placed.
Yeah, Look at me, I'm helping.
Yeah, right. I think that's really tough when you're dealing with all of this, because a lot of these people that were helping were big groups of students. And yeah, they had like a colonel and some big names of people that were there and helping. But I mean, who knows if even all the teams were there at one single time? That could have just been one particular team of people that were making all the mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not an experienced search and rescue team, which is unfortunate. Um, that definitely throws a lot of this into question then. I didn't realize that there was so much disorganization.
And that's why, to me, it's very important to bring up all these things with the investigation, because I feel like, again, this might not be a mystery if it wasn't for this.
Gotcha. One of the possible theories is that there was an avalanche, or winds were a factor, or even animals possibly being a factor. So they could have already, made chaos of this campsite, any of those scenarios, especially if you're finding your, stuff 50 feet below the snow.
I think it was 50 feet from the entrance of the tent. That's how I take that. 50 feet from the entrance of the tent. I could be wrong.
Oh, below the tent. Okay, like down the mountain.
I'm assuming. Yes.
Gotcha. Seems significant, if it got pushed 50 feet further down the mountain.
Yeah, and it's just a roll of film, so it's kind of surprising that it would survive the elements, for one. Or what would have caused that to move? Did it fall out of someone's pocket or something of that nature? I think that would likely be the most likely case of the reason why it would be there, but I don't really know.
Or somebody tried to steal it and walk away and dropped it. Dun, dun, dun.
Or we already have a whodunit, so I don't know if we want to keep adding to the whodunits. So the official report from the criminal investigation states, the belongings inside were situated as follows. By the entrance was a furnace, baskets, water flasks, one of which was filled with alcohol, a saw, and an axe. Deeper inside were the cameras. Further back was a bag with maps and documents, Dyatlov's camera, a can containing money, a diary, and windbreakers belonging to Dyatlov and Kolovatov. Like I said, it's been a couple days or a couple weeks since I've had to pronounce any of these names, so bear with me. In the corner was a bag of rusks and other bag containing breakfast cereal. Next to them was a pair of boots. The other 6 pairs of boots were at the opposite side of the tent. In the middle of the tent were 3 pairs of Valenki and 1 single one. Next to the rusks, there was a log taken from the place of the previous camp. Above all, there was a ski pole scored at several places. In the opinion of one of the members of the search party, they would only have spoiled the ski pole under emergency conditions because they had no spares.
Yeah, it seems like such a weird thing. Ritualistic almost.
If you're all the way out there and you need the skis to get back, why are you messing up one of the skis?
Yeah.
That seems odd to me, for sure. They added in the report to the court, when we were finished taking inventory of the tent's contents, we moved it to the helicopter pad, about 600 to 700 meters away. The search team sent a radio message stating, we managed to identify footprints of 8 or 9 people starting from the tent and going about 1 kilometer down the slope. And then they were lost. 1 person was in boots. The others were only in socks and barefoot. Some members of the rescue team claimed these footprints started from right outside the tent, and others that they started a little to the side of the tent. One of the searchers stated there were no footprints right around the tent because when the Dyatlov group dug, they had stacked the snow all around the tent, and later the snow was drifted by the wind, thus covering all of the tracks. But 30 or 40 meters down was a very well-preserved set of footprints.
I was doing some research earlier this morning and saw a picture of them taken while they were digging their area for the tent. It was creepy and unsettling, but you get an idea of how far down they went. It looked like they were about 3 foot down, like a little below their knees.
Okay, so kind of like trenching out the area where you're going to put the tent.
Yes, yeah, and that's a factor in the argument over whether it was a landslide that may have taken them out.
I mean, they definitely seem to take proper precautions in the vast majority of the things that they did. We talked about in the last episode about how they didn't even take all their stuff on the last leg of the trip. They had created like a storage shed or a storage little hut. And then they had left all of the non-important things, like even their one of them brought an instrument. They left it in there because they knew it just wasn't going to be proper to bring in on the rest of the trip, because it was going to be the hardest part of the journey. So it seems like they were trying to do everything they could the right way.
Right. One article I had read said that the avalanche theory was completely ruled out due to its location, and that where it was on the mountainside, there wasn't a chance of that much snow hitting them. And then an article I read more recent said that it was actually a very deceptive area, and they could have thought that the conditions ruled out the avalanche, especially Dyatlov, but it is something that maybe due to the extreme and unique conditions in the area could have happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the reason why all of this is so interesting, is just because there's so many factors that surround all of this that could make it entirely different. So another statement taken from the criminal case is as follows. There were footprints of bare feet, but in socks, somewhere from Valenki, and occasionally we could make out the tread of the ski boot. All of these prints were raised higher than the actual wind-scored surface of the slope. We followed these prints from the tent in the direction of the spreading cedar, which was clearly prominent on the hill. First we lost, and then we found the tracks again. They appeared again in the birch tree undergrowth, and then they went down along the ravine which led to the river. A statement again from the criminal case explains the footprints. Footprints can be preserved in the mountains because of the way the wind works there. You see the prints not as lowered imprints, but rather as raised columns, because the snow under the print is left, compacted, and cannot be eroded by the wind. But the area around it has been swept by the wind. Then the sunrise makes the print area become even firmer, and in this way it can be preserved for the entire winter. So it's interesting how in some areas they were completely swept away, but in other areas they were almost preserved, to make it like almost that much more infuriating. I would have to imagine, like, why wasn't it like this everywhere we went? But yet now I have areas where it's like, okay, no prints again. Oh, now they're back. Oh, no prints again. But the prints you do find are like immaculate prints. Like, oh, that would have to be infuriating.
Yeah, and that's something that leads itself to the avalanche theory again, because there's different pockets of compactable snow, and then fluffy snow can create these ice sheets that can be, 15, 20 feet long and just slide down.
It definitely is not an area that I would want to be hanging out in. Like even when Donnie Eichar went and traveled back there, I don't think he went in the same time of year. But he said that it like took everything he had to just get through that area. So, I mean, I know they chose this because they wanted it to be a challenge, but man, they definitely got what they were asking for.
Yeah, I was doing some research and looking at the latitude of this compared to, say, some other spots like Skinwalker Ranch, and it's surprising how far up toward the Arctic that this is. So I imagine it's always bitterly cold, always windy, always a lot of snow and precipitous conditions.
So while looking carefully around the area, Mikhail Sherovin noticed something dark close to a cedar tree. There was a flat area next to the cedar, and on this were remains of a fire. About 2 or 3 meters from the fire, they found Yuri Doroshenko, frozen, without his clothes, and with his hand burned. And a little to the side, they found Yuri Kurvanyshenko in the same state. Under Doroshenko's body were 3 or 4 cedar branches of about the same thickness.
About 2 or 3 meters would be like 6 to 8 feet, 6 to 9 feet from the fire.
Okay, so not probably far enough away to not really get a ton of warmth from it, but some, I would imagine. Like, you're not going to, and depending on how big the fire was, I guess.
It sounds like Yuri flew a little too close to the fire with his burned hand.
Yeah, definitely. Describing the condition of the bodies in the official record, the prosecutor in the criminal case stated, Kurvanashenko's right leg has no footwear. On his left foot, there is a brown sock torn. Another sock like this was discovered half burnt next to the fire. On the backs of the hands, the skin is torn. Between the fingers, there was blood. The index finger is also torn. The skin of the left shin is torn and covered in blood. There are no more visible injuries on his body. Doroshenko has woolen socks on his feet, and over these socks, another lighter sock. His ear, lips, and nose are covered in blood, and on his left hand, the middle finger is bloody. So I wonder if this was a struggle with the elements, like them trying to break apart the tree to make the fire, or if this was a struggle with possible other people, or if this was just something to where, like you said, did they get too close to the fire and possibly do something stupid? Like, there's a lot of possibilities in there, but that's a lot of blood.
Yeah. Well, hypothermia can do weird things, and one of its severe effects is paradoxical nakedness or paradoxical undressing. And it's a strangely terminal burrowing behavior where people get undressed and try to, peel off all of their clothing, and it actually increases their heat loss.
But to them, they feel like they're getting warmer.
Yes. They're definitely not thinking soundly at that point. It's a autonomous process of the brainstem, which is triggered in the final state of hypothermia and produces a primitive and burrowing-like behavior of protection as seen in hibernating animals.
Interesting. So you think maybe that could have been part of it? It's just since they were mentally not sound at that point, potentially from hypothermia, that could have led to the injuries?
Yes, I think so. And that's something that's found in a lot of like missing person cases. I know that you're familiar with missing 411 and cases like that. And a lot of times when they do find people that have been out in the elements, they've ditched their shoes, they're naked, even if it's 30 degrees below outside.
Yeah, if you guys, we might get into that in another podcast, but if you want to see some craziness, Missing 411, was it David Paulides?
Yeah.
And check that out.
It'll make you never want to walk in the woods again.
Yeah, by yourself, that's for sure.
Yeah. You have me wanting to get one of those GPS trackers
for
my excursions.
Yes. Well, Solus might be trying to find a cryptid. We're going to get into that in another episode. And I was just asking if he's going to go do that to please take a personal GPS locator because people don't normally go missing if you have one of those on you when you go hiking. So good point.
Yeah, definitely taking that advice.
Yeah, definitely. Back to the episode here. So, all right. At the time, however, it was not obvious that one of the corpses was Doroshenko's. One of the searchers reported in the radio message sent by the search team to Ivdale, his face was completely covered in snow, but we're now of the opinion that he is Doroshenko, not Zolotaryov. They are both the biggest guys. A student in the search party, Vadim, made a statement for the criminal case. Next to the bodies was a fire. Nearby were more than 10 small fir tree branches cut with a finished knife. The lower dry branches of about 5 centimeters diameter had been cut from the cedar. Some of these were lying next to the fire, and the snow around the fire was trampled.
So it sounds like they were trying to cook the fat guys.
That might be something that might have come up. Who knows?
He was a burned hand. They're just trying to cook up some sausages.
I think the two big guys of the group were like, hey, man, I'm going to start breaking some parts off of these trees and we're going to make ourselves a fire. And I think if that's where I think was possible with, not the face injuries, obviously, but the ones to the hands, I think could easily have come from them trying to rip off branches and bark from the fir tree.
Well, that's a very good point. Yeah, fir and cedar, they're gnarly.
So not the facial injuries. That could maybe be from... I know some reports had said that the people had tried to climb that tree and maybe they were trying to figure out where they were in reference to the tent. and they had fallen off of the tree and maybe hit some branches on the way down, I think that could have been a possibility, because those trees, if I'm picturing it correctly, they have like bark that can break off fairly easily. So maybe if you got up to the top of a branch that you thought was more alive than it really was, and that thing broke out from underneath of you, it could be possible you could scrape your face on the way down, or, any number of things.
That's true. And those trees are probably already holding ice and snow as well as your body weight.
From the captain's official statement, it's possible to surmise that other people had since been by the fire. We found various garments next to it rather than on the bodies, but we didn't find any other bodies. The trees near the fire had been cut with knives, but we found no knives with the bodies.
Oh, that's interesting.
They stated that Doroshenko and Krivonashenko, maybe with the help of others, had made a pretty good fire with the branches of the fir trees, but that fire had been all right for maybe an hour or an hour and a half. 8-centimeter branches of cedar had burned all the way through. They stated for the criminal case, for about 20 meters around the cedar, there was evidence of young fir trees being cut with a knife.
About 60 feet.
What was that?
I said that's about 60 feet.
Okay. We saw around 20 such cut stumps, but we didn't see any of the cut branches left except for one. It isn't possible to imagine they were used to maintain the fire. First of all, they are not good for firewood. Second, around them were quite a lot of dried twigs and material.
That's what I was thinking. When I think of fir, I think of like a Christmas tree or like a pine, and they're very sappy. They don't burn very well, very like noxious to try to breathe in, and very smoky. So I wonder if more, instead of for heat, that they were trying to make a signal.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a pretty good thought. Maybe that, but I don't know who they would expect to see it. Maybe some Mansi or one of the really far off prison camps. But I don't really maybe that is part of what caused them to be found, if you like that theory, that they weren't alone. Maybe the smoky fire caused for other people to see that they were there.
Right. Or maybe they were trying to make the fire for the other people that weren't with their group.
Good call, because they weren't all together. Yeah, so maybe they were just trying to get the other members of the group to all coalesce around one area. So the tall cedar tree originally spotted by Yuri and Mikhail held some clues to the events of that night. The following accounts from individuals present at the scene are similar, and they bear each other out. All the low branches of the cedar within arm's reach were completely broken. One was cut 4 or 5 meters high. They were thick. These types of branches are extremely difficult to break, even if, for instance, you hang on them with your entire body weight.
Yeah, they're really tough to break, really bendy.
The lower dry branches of the cedar were broken up to 2 meters high. Someone climbed the tree because the branches 4 or 5 meters high were also broken. So that's where I think those injuries came from, more than likely. I think someone climbed up the tree, busted their butt, and fell down the tree and got a little marked up in the process.
Yeah, that's about 15 feet. It's a pretty good fall.
So most of the dry branches up to 5 meters were broken. Besides this, the side of the tree facing the slope and the tent was completely cleared of branches. These were not dry. These were young and were not used. Some of them were just lying on the ground, and the others were hanging on the lower branches of the cedar. It looked as if someone had created a viewing hide facing the site from where they had came.
That's creepy.
Well, I legitimately think whatever it was that drove them out of that tent, after they got out of it, they couldn't find their way back. And that's what they were trying to do, is to figure out where the hell they were so they could try to find their way back to the tent.
And is it safe to go back?
I think that's a definite part you could add to that. Not only could it be that they didn't know where the tent was, maybe it was they did know where it was, but they didn't think it was safe to go there.
Yeah, if they had left in some sort of distress, even in argument, say, they might want to, hunker down until it's safe to go back.
Yeah, or if there were intruders, maybe they were trying to see if they had left. That same day, at a distance of 1,100 meters from the tent and 300 meters from the cedar, Igor Dyatlov's body was found. He was lying.
That's about a half a mile.
The 1,100 meters or the 300?
Yeah, 1,100 meters is like 3,600 feet.
Okay.
So it's like 0.6 miles.
So 0.6 miles from the tent was where they found his body. So he wasn't that far.
300 meters is, that's not far from the cedar. That's like 100 feet.
He was lying on his back, his head in the direction of the tent. He had no hat, covered with snow, and his arm was leaning on a small birch sapling. Dyatlov was lying 300 meters away from the cedar towards the tent, next to a birch sapling with his face up. His left hand was kind of dragged to his face, as if he had tried to protect himself from the wind. He was dressed more warmly than Doroshenko and Krivonashenko. He had a fur vest, his collared shirt, underwear, ski trousers, and other clothes. But he had no hat, gloves, boots, or shoes. Also, he was without his padded jacket or windbreaker. On his wrist was a watch that had stopped at 5:31. The impression was that he tried to go up the slope, judging by the way his body was situated, and next to his head was a cluster of small saplings in which he probably struck. But if he had been heading down the slope, then he would have had to go around them to get into the position where his body was discovered. The prosecutor's record reads, Dyatlov's left elbow is leaning on a birch sapling. His head is clearly behind the birch at about 5 to 7 centimeters, and there are no visible injuries on the body. There is ice on the face and under the chin. Radio message was sent by the search team. We found the bodies of Dyatlov, Doroshenko, and Krivonashenko or Zolotaryov. It's hard to say for sure because there are major injuries on their faces, hands, and legs. The prosecutor and the search party are trying to identify them. Finding the first corpses was devastating for the rescue teams, especially for the students. They came to the site to save their friends, who they believed were only in trouble. They were anxious to find them and bring them help. Initially, the students were very eager. They didn't eat and worked up a sweat. Then, once they realized their friends were dead, the tension let up, and silence fell all around.
They mentioned the facial injuries and the injuries to the hands and legs. Being out there exposed, they also could have, been eaten by animals, slowly picked at, or maybe been in various states of decay. But these people are also very emotional that are finding them, so they might have thought that they were injuries.
They do mention on one of the autopsies about specifically, I don't want to get too graphic, but that someone did sustain injuries from animals kind of feeding on them, if you will. So that does come up and it is mentioned. So I don't know why necessarily it might not have been mentioned here. I think that might be because they really do think it was possibly from them, injuring themselves coming out of the tree or what have you. But for Dyatlov, it seems to me that he was on his way back to the tent and either he fell or he succumbed to the elements or what have you at that point. So another quote was, on completely open flat snow, swept by wind and snow, Axelrod's dog became interested in something. We dug a little, and under 10 centimeters of snow, we found an elbow. The general location of the body was beneath 50 centimeters of snow. The head was pointing in the direction of the tent, and the whole position was typical for a person trying to walk or crawl uphill. There are no trees for 70 meters. The body lies, like the previous bodies, face to the ground on its right side. The arms are bent under the body. Both legs are half bent, and the right is tucked up into the stomach. This gives the impression she was climbing. Her face is covered in blood. In the small of her back, there's blood. It can be conjectured that she didn't try to crawl forward, but was trying to maintain her position. There appeared to be no injuries on her body with the exception of some grazes to the face. She probably got these from falling down on the stony ridges. We found Komogorova with her head fractured. The body suggests a massive windstorm. The prosecutor called for medical experts to see the bodies. The strongest core of the group has been located, which means we must look for the others under the snow.
Yeah, so there's another mention of the wind and the windstorms that night.
In the criminal case, there were another list dated the 3rd of March. Things brought from the storage. Among them is an ice pick. It isn't clear whether the ice pick was the same one found by the tent or if there was another ice pick in the Labaz. If so, this would be strange, considering there is only a single ice pick on the list of items the group stated to have with them. This could, of course, be the same ice pick, but listed along the material from the Labaz, since no ice pick was initially reported by those who found the Labaz.
If I learned anything from horror movies, an ice pick means nothing good.
Right? So as Moses Axelrod recalls, Rustem Slobodin, the strongest member of the group physically, laid face down with his arms flung out. On his right hand was a contusion at the base of his thumb. In Axelrod's words, one of his legs, the right one, I think, was in a valenki, and his left foot, without a valenki, was under his right foot. His face was completely calm without any trace of violence. Under his chest and the rest of the body was a layer of half snow, half ice, about 7 centimeters deep, which gives me reason to think he didn't die immediately, but was alive for some time after he laid down. His watch had stopped at 8:45.
First of all, can we talk about how badass of a name Moses Axelrod is?
Yeah, it's almost more badass than the guy from Billions. Was that David Axelrod?
So a valenke is like a fur boot or a fur-lined boot, kind of like an UGG, I guess.
Okay.
1950s style. So it seems like they're mentioning the difference between like a ski boot and the valenke, and the valenke is probably what they would use to keep warm at night, where the ski boot is more what they're traveling in.
Okay, so one more specializes in warmth, one more for actual activities.
Right.
So the cost of the search operations was very high. There was an official letter from Nicholas Klinoff, the prosecutors from Sverdlovsk, to S.A. Glunskim. Sorry about these names, guys. The director of the National Institute of Research and Criminology, which states, the enormous expense of the search may keep growing if no new method of searching for corpses is applied. We know that your institution planned to create a device for spotting bodies buried underground using ultrasound. We heard there was some successful results when the device was used in similar situations. We think it would be reasonable to let us try such a device in our current search. The Institute issued an official reply stating that they didn't have a device such as this. So it's interesting that they were at one point kind of like, man, I really want to find everybody, because they found the initial couple people, but the cost of everything was getting so high because of them having to like helicopter people in and out and all the supplies and the different stuff, that they were like, man, maybe we need to come up with some different ideas here of some ways that we can try to find them if they happen to be buried under the snow.
Yeah. And at that point, you're probably also risking people's lives. You know, you already lost 9 people in that terrain and in that environment. Do you want to keep sending people in? And
I thought this was interesting. A reporter had stated in his notebook, all night yesterday, they spoke about the dead, about why they broke open the tent. It was said that Dyatlov really was full of himself and loved to issue commands. One time he told the group to go from one side of the river to the other for no reason, simply without reason. One day everyone became so outraged by his behavior they stopped following his orders. Then he left them and went on a hunger strike. When he was
this guy sounds like a real prima donna.
And this is from the Don't Go There book, this part. And so This is where I'm saying, like, there are some things in this book that are a little different than what I heard in other places. A lot of what I heard in other documentaries and on Astonishing Legends was that this guy was like the guy you wanted to be a part of his hikes. He was like the dude. He was like the Fonzie of the school. Like everybody wanted to go on his expeditions. So this doesn't
he
sound
was an
like
inspiring leader. And
this doesn't sound like the same guy.
No.
When he was part of the rank and file, he was good, but as a leader, all mistakes were attributed to him. Two people in particular who'd been with him before spoke about this. They said negative things about him as a leader of the group. One said it was stupid for the group to have left at 3 o'clock when darkness would fall in 1.5 to 2 hours.
I can say from playing team sports, and you can probably see it just from watching team sports, things are great when you're winning and when things are going well. But when you're the leader and things start going wrong, then things can deteriorate very quickly.
I think also it could be something to say that the guy who was on the trip with them, that was the former military officer, that maybe he had some disagreements with Dyatlov about the way that he was leading the group. He was the oldest person there. He had clearly had some experience in doing past hard activities, if you will. So I feel like there could have been a possibility that maybe he disagreed with the way that Dyatlov was leading the group, which could have led possibly to the argument that calls them to, someone to leave the tent. I don't know, but I think that could be a possibility.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. From the sounds of it, you have two very big cult of personalities almost. It sounded like the other guy was Simeon. Yeah, it seemed like he really ingratiated himself by being somebody who was fun to be around, and was playing music and stuff. And I don't know, maybe that even got to Dyatlov a little bit, that this guy was getting to be a little more popular than him.
Having somebody else in the group that actually could draw attention.
Yeah,
I could see that, because they did mention a lot that he knew songs that no one else knew, and everyone was trying to pick up on these new songs and take part in the new songs and things of that nature. So it could have been something that bothered him.
Yeah, especially if, he had any kind of love interest in either of the two women on the trip. He could be looking at this guy like, this jerk.
So at this point in both of the books, they kind of talk about the town of Sverdlovsk being abuzz with people trying to figure out what happened to the hikers. Some people assumed it was because they stumbled upon a testing site they weren't supposed to see. Others thought they were victims of a fireball or some other phenomenon. So, I definitely think that it's something, in this particular situation, that once it gets back to town, things definitely started to kind of get out of control as far as the government was concerned, because the populace, the people, were really starting to play their own game of telephone.
Yeah, and there's already a lot of lore in that area between the Mansi and residents in that village. I had seen some articles saying people were used to seeing fireballs, used to seeing UFOs and ball lightning even in that area.
All right, so I took this from the book. The whole institute and then the city itself was buzzing around like a demolished beehive. Everywhere, there were hundreds of questions. Where are the young people? What happened to them? In some circles, there are already rumors about atomic tests in the mountains to the north of Ivdale. People living in northern villages had seen the flash, heard the roar, and felt the blow of the shockwave. On top of this, periodically, for example, 1 every 2 weeks, strange fireballs were said to appear in the night sky, starting in January of 1959. Many people had observed them on the outskirts of Serov and Ivdale. The locals were alarmed, and rumors were spreading. The authorities were becoming concerned and took measures to bring the situation under control. It was so frequent that they were seeing fireballs in the sky that even the local authorities were having to do something about it. They were calling up the local sheriff and, hey man, I'm seeing these fireballs in the sky. And so much so that these guys have known reports or known retorts even that they're telling these people.
Yeah, it seems quite common in that area. I found a couple of articles in this vein to support some of my theories that we're going to get into later. And I think most people are familiar with the Tunguska event, which is where there's that large explosion in Siberia that flattened 770 square miles of forest. That was well east of Dyatlov Pass, but a much smaller airburst occurred over a populated area in Russia in 2013 at Chelyabinsk in the Ural district. It's east of the Ural Mountains. The meteoroid measured 17 to 20 meters across and inflicted over 1,200 injuries, mainly from broken glass. And from an article I found at harvard.edu, Chelyabinsk fireball and Dyatlov Pass tragedy from September of 2013. Quote, the catastrophic Dyatlov Pass, where 9 people mysteriously died at once, occurs there. Mansi Aborigines know this place as deadly, where killing white shining spheres appear. Moreover, this belt intersection is well known among UFO hunters as the Permian Triangle. They meet there to observe unusual atmospheric shining and other anomalous phenomena. Yenisei, Tunguska, Baikal region lightning balls appear regularly, causing broken trees. In conclusion, these two tectonically distinctive regions are famous by anomalously often appearance of bolides, a bolide being a large meteor which explodes in the atmosphere, sometimes which is accompanied by meteorite falls. Out of 343 observations, meteorites accompanied less than 10%. Unclear remains a strange attraction of bolides by very pronounced tectonic features. So
are they saying that the comets are like kind of attracted to tectonic areas?
Yeah, and this kind of unique tectonic feature draws these things out. Also, I don't know exactly what correlation to make. I just thought that this article and its headline was really cool. It was a recent astronomy.com article titled, quote, a meteorite killed a man in Iraq in 1888, historic records suggest. A group of scientists found an account from August 10th, 1888, recorded by the Ottoman Empire. The fallen debris, quote, killed one man and paralyzed another.
I definitely think it's possible that if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's kind of like being struck by lightning. Like that can be a very devastating thing to experience. You can still survive, but I mean, it could be very devastating to your body. So I would have to imagine that if you were close to an event like that, the only thing that I wonder is, though, there's no reported impact sites or things of that nature that were around that area. So
there wasn't with the Tunguska event either. There was no impact crater.
Interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah, it was. It's thought the object disintegrated 3 to 6 miles above the Earth's surface.
Wow.
But the equivalent blast was 10 to 15 megatons of TNT, approximately 1,000 times greater than the atomic bomb.
So basically, even though it fell apart in the atmosphere, the inertia, if you will, of that thing coming through still was enough power to blow down all that forest.
Correct. Wow. Yeah, if you've never seen any pictures, man, check it out. It is really neat to look at.
That's definitely something that I think is an interesting thing to experience. That's a definite interesting theory to explore with all of this, because Mother Nature in and of itself has some crazy things that happen, but yet you have to imagine all of the unknown things that we have that come from space. I mean, I've been listening to a lot of stuff about Oumuamua recently, and if we had known about it sooner, we could have possibly sent things up to get testings out of it. But the problem was that by the time we had figured out what it was, for us to send anything to it, it was moving too fast. Like we couldn't catch up at that point. So they are saying in the future, if we happen to spot another object that's like Oumuamua, then perhaps we could send stuff up to actually get some readings off of it and figure out if it's natural or not.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild.
So strange things from the sky, all part of this. Who knows?
Yeah, I was actually really excited to bring that up later on in the theories, but I'm surprised that was mentioned in what you had read too.
Yeah, definitely. And for it to be mentioned so prominently by the locals and different people of that area, I think is important, where they're saying that they get like 2 to 3 reports a week.
Wow. That something I need to go back to, and maybe you and I need to touch on too, is the that Permian Triangle. It seems pretty fascinating, and apparently a lot of ufologists go to that area because of the frequency of sightings.
Well, that's kind of like when we were talking about the Unidentified show on one of our previous podcasts, that space that's off of the coast of California, that little island there. They talk about that being a really big hotspot as well. So I wonder if, because a lot of people theorize that maybe it could be like an under the water base, like in the ocean, or maybe something that is just something that we haven't come across yet. Who knows?
Well, there's tectonic features under the ocean as well, and mountain ranges and such.
That's true. Yeah, maybe all those things kind of correlate together. I'm not saying that I believe in like crab people or whatever is that other, what is it? That hybrid of people they say that live in the Antarctic. I'm not going that far.
Oh, okay. We go on hollow earth theory?
Yeah. No, not going down that road. Another student said it was a prominent theory that the students were caught trying to flee the Soviet Union, and that was the real reason for their trip. The student searcher also said that he was briefed to look for evidence that the students planned on fleeing while searching for the hikers.
It seems like an odd place to start fleeing from the Soviet Union. It's way too in the middle of...
That's what I was thinking. Wouldn't you go further west?
Russia. Yeah. Get over toward Estonia and Eastern Europe.
So Yuri Yudin was called in to help identify the bodies when he returned from his trip to visit his family. Shortly after the bodies were recovered, the government put pressure on the families to have their children buried where they were found, not in Sverdlovsk. The parents protested and said they were having a funeral on March 9th. When the local government heard about this, they basically informed the parents that their children would be buried in different cemeteries. On Lenin Street...
only a little strange.
This is where to me, it starts getting a little odd. Like, why would the government care? Other than, I know they didn't want a big show of solidarity or a big show of support. Why would that matter in this particular instance if it was just something where they happened to succumb to natural causes?
Yeah, I mean, maybe optics, because it seems like they try to make them out to be heroes a little bit. Like they have a group tomb at a certain cemetery in Yekaterinburg, Russia. So it could be optics, but it's just conspiracy theory wise lends itself to, why are you meddling that deep? Yes.
On Lenin Street, they display the decorated coffins of Igor Dyatlov, Zina Komogorova, Yuri Doroshenko, and Rustem Slobodin. The coffins are open. Walking around, everyone has a chance to say goodbye and see firsthand the brown-tinged color and abrasions on their faces of their friends. Bent over them were their parents, relatives, and friends with inconsolable tears in their eyes. Back in the mountains, it was the first day of May before more discoveries were made. Approximately 50 meters down from the cedar on the huge snowdrift, one of the searchers made out some more small fir tree branches and noticed these twigs were leading down into the drift. So they began to dig, and at a depth of 3.5 meters, they found a bed of cut branches. It consisted of 14 firs and 1 birch, and strewn across the pad were belongings and clothes. The clothes included 1 leg of a pair of black ski trousers.
Well, there's got to be a good story there. 1 leg, huh?
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. A thick brown woolen sweater, a white woolen jumper made in China. I don't know why they had to include that.
Oddly specific.
A pair of brown trousers tied at the ankles but flared open with a tear to widen them.
So that's something that you would do more to like prevent drowning, right?
I think of that as your clothes don't fit and you're trying to make them fit.
Okay.
I think what happened is that once they got away from the tent and realized how in a bad situation they were, they started borrowing clothes from each other.
Okay.
Like as people were injured or possibly passed, then maybe they took their clothes and made makeshift outfits. 15 meters up the bank from the stream, they found half of a beige sweater, as well as the other half of ski trousers. 15 meters from the bower, they found a spoon and a knife sheath. Pretty soon, about 20 meters from this pad, at a depth of 4 meters, a probe emerged from the snow with a fragment of flesh, and they started to dig.
So that's under about 12 feet of snow.
So just imagine, like, this entire time they've been out there for months with these little, like, poles just hitting things in the snow trying to find stuff. And then finally, one of the poles comes up with skin on it.
Thunk.
From the official record of the discoveries of the bodies, on the northwest slope of the hill, 880, about 50 meters from the cedar in the stream, we have discovered 4 bodies, 3 men and 1 woman. The body of the woman has been identified as Lumilda Dubinina. The bodies of the men cannot be identified without removing them from the water. They are buried in snow, 2.5 meters deep. The men are lying with their heads facing north and downstream, and the body of the woman is lying facing upstream. She is dressed in a small skull cap and a yellow singlet, then a flannel shirt, 2 sweaters, one gray, the other dark, and on her legs are leggings and brown ski trousers. On one foot are 2 woolen socks, and on her right foot is bound half of the beige sweater. On the back of her head and on her back, there are traces of damage from the probe. Her body was already starting to decay. The first man is dressed in a khaki-colored windbreaker, and on his wrist he has 2 watches. One, a Pobeda, and the other a Sportif. The Pobeda had stopped at 8:38, and the other had stopped at 8:15. It isn't possible to see the head and legs of his body because it isn't completely exposed. The other 2 bodies lie in kind of a hug, both with nothing on their heads, and not all of their hair.
I feel you guys.
The baldness is real. They are both dressed in windbreakers, but it is hard to say what else, and it will have to wait until we get them out of the stream. The bodies are decaying, and we have photographed them. They need to be taken out of the stream immediately because they are decaying fast and will soon be lost in the stream. Very fast. Some of the searchers had mentioned it didn't really seem that those in charge were interested in a proper investigation. The lead investigator did not check out the branches or the clothes, or even take pictures of the things that they had noted. The searchers said it was as if they had already had an explanation of what happened. The searchers would have to carry the 4 bodies out of the area on stretchers. When they reached the helicopters, they would not take the bodies on board. It is said the pilots feared the bodies had radiation. A radio message complaining about this situation. I thought you'd love this, bud. This is a scandal. I and 14 other people brought these bodies on our shoulders, and they refused to take the bodies in spite of me insisting. As a communist, I am outraged by the behavior of the crew, and I ask you to inform the Communist Party leaders about it. And
Comrades, am I right?
I'm telling you every time. And I have to mention to you, for clarity, these bodies are frozen. We pack them for transportation, and there are no reason to refuse to take them. The medical expert refused to examine or to cut the bodies here on site. It is absolutely not dangerous from the point of hygiene. They are folded and covered in special impervious material. The crew said they would not transport them unless they are in zinc coffins.
Sounds like they know something that everybody else should know.
It's definitely leads to the conspiracy theory part of things here, I think, when you're talking about possible exposures to radiation and things of that nature. Now, I do remember, I believe it was from Dead Mountain, that they talked about a lot of the radiation levels that were found, and I talked to someone much smarter than myself to see about if they felt like that was any actual real amount of radiation, and they said it was all nominal. I would say that I think that they would likely have been found with higher levels. Especially, we talked about on the last podcast, one of the guys actually was tasked with cleaning up a nuclear explosion. So if that was the case, I would imagine that there might have been a case that he was like having trace amounts of radiation on his body for, possibly years to come. I don't know what the half-life is on that stuff. Like, who knows what he was exposed to during that cleanup. So I don't know, man. I don't know if I fall on that realm of things, but there are definitely weird things that happened, like the pilots saying they're not going to take the bodies, that would lead you to possibly believe that maybe they were in some way infected with radiation.
Yeah, well, there were definitely secret government installations in the area that were making nuclear weapons at the time. So if it was somebody in the military or even knew of things going on in the military, they might have just assumed that they were close to the area and didn't want to be exposed to it. Now, the one article I saw explained away radiation being a result of thorium, which is present in camping lanterns, or at least used to be.
Okay.
But
so that could possibly give them the trace amounts?
Yeah, I think that would be nominal or minimum, but it could be why it was present.
So this discussion between the people in the search party and the pilots became so heated that they even had one of the heads of the search party pulled a gun on one of the pilots and threatened them. One of the medical staff jumped in and found a way to package the bodies that pleased the pilots in the end, and everybody continued on about their day. But it got so severe that guns were pulled.
Wow.
So these bodies were buried in closed coffins, unlike the ones found in February, which were buried in open coffins, as is the usual practice in Russia to this day, except for military deaths. Many years later, in the 1990s, Lev Ivanov, the official investigator for the case, apologized for preventing the parents from dealing with their loved ones in a proper way, not even being allowed to see the faces of their children. But the reasons for his decisions are clear enough. In an interview given in a newspaper in the 1990s, after his retirement, he said he had made one exception for the father of Lumilda Dubinina. While she was in the coffin in the morgue, he let her father enter and permitted someone to open the lid so that he could see her. When he saw his daughter's corpse, he fainted.
Oh, that was nice of you.
It could be just because of the condition. They just thought it was a little much for people to see. But conspiracy theory-wise, it definitely adds to it a little bit, I think.
Right.
Kolovatov's sister, Rima, also wrote a letter full of despair and questions. I was present at all the funerals of the group. Why were their faces and hands all so dark brown? How can we explain the fact that the four of them who were beside the fire were obviously alive? Why didn't they try to return to the tent? If they were considerably better dressed, as far as I can see from clothes missing from the tent, if it wasn't a natural disaster, then for sure, after being warmed by the fire, then the guys would have crawled back to the tent. The whole group wouldn't have perished from an Arctic storm. All right, so this is some of the case files notes taken from the Don't Go There book. The first investigator of the case was removed after only 20 days. He said 30 years after the investigation, it was because he wouldn't say the hikers died from exposure to freezing conditions. There is also evidence that he might have been removed from the lead investigation as early as 2 days into the actual investigation. There is also pretty clear evidence that the investigation started before the official discovery of the dead bodies. Even though the physical criminal case file was recovered, having suffered from age, the frequent use, the initial date was February 6th of 1959, and it was copied without correction on the front cover.
It's my sister's birthday.
Oh, wow.
Not 1959.
Yeah.
She's not that old yet.
In the criminal case folder, the witness statements are found immediately after the spoof newspaper. Ivan Remfel, forester of the Vichy region, was stated as saying, on January 25th, a group of hikers came to me and showed me their route, asking what would be the best route to their summit of Mount Otorten. And they also asked me if they could see my map of the area. While I was looking over their route, I told them it was dangerous to go into the Urals in the winter because there are deep crevasses and some holes where one can fall. Anyway, the winds there are so severe they can actually blow people down.
Wow.
Yeah, they told me this kind of expedition would be graded at the highest level of difficulty. I told them to go ahead. I showed them my map, they checked it against their own, and noted some edges and boundaries of the woods in that area. I advised them to take a closer route along one of our forest rides. They told me they would decide when they reached the second mining camp where they would go. I think they could only have died from a natural disaster or climate conditions. I don't think the Mansi would have hurt them. I've met the Mansi all the time, and they were always friendly and hospitable. From what old people have told me, there have been a number of people that perished while trying to cross the Ural Ridge before. Mansi live in that area, but they don't have sacred stones or secret places in that spot. Then there was Ivan Pashin's testimony. Pashin was one of the local guides who was escorting Slobostov and Sherevin, some of the searchers, when they discovered the tent. He refused to approach it. He officially testified. At the approximate time when these hikers died, even in our settlement of Vishay, the winds were so extreme they made children fall. I've been a hunter here since my early years, and I can remember people dying in these kinds of winds. Sometimes we've waited 6 days without food, trapped in a shelter of a ravine, waiting for the wind to stop. When the Mansi came to our area to search, they actually acted very naturally. It was obvious they felt sorry for the students, and they tried to help. The average wind in that area was reported to be around 12 miles an hour, just in case you're curious.
Yeah, that doesn't seem enough to blow you down, but it's going to be really uncomfortable.
I mean, I remember taking a trip to Alaska, and when the wind would blow, it was so much that it would like take your breath away. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't like going to knock you over. But like literally, it was hard to breathe when the wind would blow. So here are the results of the examination of the tent filed in the criminal case. It has been established that on the surface of the tent, there are some damaged areas, caused as a result of an impact by some sharp weapon, such as a knife, as well as some tears. The first piece of damage looks like a jagged line, 32 centimeters in length. Above is a small piercing of the fabric, about 2.2 centimeters long, and the corners of the piercing are slightly torn. The second and third damage points have a somewhat irregularly curved shape. Their approximate lengths are 89 centimeters and 42 centimeters. From both sides of the third cut, pieces of the fabric are missing. It's just a hole. Next to the cut edges, there are some superficial damage to the fabric that looks like insignificant tears and abrasions. The character and the shape of all the above-mentioned damage are evidence that they were formed because of the action on the fabric from the inside with the blade of some tool. And I think this is the part that I feel like is the most odd. Okay, let's say it was an argument. Why were they trying to cut outside of the tent? Why were there knife cuts from inside the tent to the outside of the tent? That to me doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense, especially when one of their jobs on a regular basis was to patch the tent.
Yeah, true. That's just one of the most unnerving things about this case, in my opinion. It's really hard to wrap your head around what could possibly make people do that, especially people who are so well trained in this area.
So to kind of wrap up this particular episode, what I wanted to do is just to kind of talk about how it's this investigation in and of itself had many times that like the leader of the investigation was essentially like called back for questioning by Moscow, if you will. And it seemed like thereafter they just kind of lost their interest with the case. So the records show that many members of the rescue team were questioned about windstorms and other possible factors, such as the presence of unknown parties on the slope. Some of their testimonies have already appeared in the description of the rescue operation, and others will be quoted as we continue later on. Around the time of these inquiries, Ivanov began to create his versions of the events, which was murder. But just as had been the case with the previous investigator, he became closely supervised. He was called to Moscow, and according to the testimony of members of the search party, came back a different man. After this, the nature of the investigation changed. Not only did it become more covert, but it also was apparent that the investigators were much less active, merely going through the motions, and no longer interested in uncovering the truth. So did we actually have that? Did we have an unforeseen force, possibly by the government, that were leading this investigation a certain way from the beginning? Was it something that was just pure circumstance? I think it's interesting because there's that show, I think it's called Expedition Unknown on the Discovery Channel. And I actually cut this part out of the last episode of the podcast, but since we're here, I feel like it's okay to talk about it now. They had found a document that in the document basically showed, like we talked about on the beginning of on the cover of the case file, the investigation started before they were ever reported missing. Like, how did the government know that they were gone and they were missing before they were ever even supposed to be missing? Like, that makes no sense to me. Unless there was a major miscommunication with dates, then I don't foresee how there wasn't some knowledge of something that went awry in the situation that wasn't natural that happened to these people. But I don't really know. And it's a shame with all this because I don't know that we'll ever get an answer. I think that's part of the reason why people are so fascinated by this case, is because it's so hard to get information that is easily accessible to the point to where you can draw conclusions from it. There's a lot of information out there, but I feel like all of this information possibly could point to different conclusions. And
yeah,
go ahead.
Whenever you start heading down one path thinking you have your head wrapped around it, you'll come across something that all of a sudden doesn't make sense, and you have to rewind and start looking at it from a different perspective.
So what we're going to do in the final episode, the part 3 of the Dyatlov Pass, is that we're going to kind of go through, we talked about the actual hike. We've talked about the investigation. So now it's time to talk about the theories. So in the final episode, we're going to go through a lot more in depth with the fireball theories, possibly talk about a little bit with Yetis. I know one of the things is Solus has done a lot of research on what he thinks might be something that was a huge contributing factor that people don't really talk about a whole lot. Do you want to give us a teaser on that, Solus?
Sure. And I believe when we were discussing, our notes and recording this part 2, I brought this up a little bit. Again, more and more stuff is coming out, and one of the big problems with trying to go through any information that came out of the Soviet Union at that time is all of the secrecy, the government secrecy and misinformation that they did let out. Something that didn't come to light until the 1980s is the existence of City 40, which was Russia's deadly nuclear secret.
Awesome. So we're going to get into more about that in the next episode. If you don't know what that is, maybe do a little Googling before the next episode and we'll be able to follow along with us. But we're going to talk about that next time as well, and just kind of go through all the possible theories that are out there. I want to detail what the theory is in both of the books that we talked about, Dead Mountain with Donnie Eichar and Don't Go There by Svetlana Oss. So we will go through what both of those books say is the main theory, and we'll also go through our own. So if that's exciting to you, definitely make sure you stay tuned. Definitely make sure you click that like button and subscribe. I want to thank you if you've made it this far into the episode. Definitely make sure you stay tuned. We have a lot of great things coming up again for the Beyond Explanation podcast. Again, sorry for the long hiatus, but we are back now. So we should hopefully be able to do it on a more regular basis. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks Solus for showing up and for hanging out as always. I always do appreciate when you come by.
Thanks, B. It's great to be back at it. And thanks for tuning in, friends. Stay healthy.
Yep. Stay happy, stay healthy. That's what's important now. And just have a wonderful rest of your night. Goodbye now.